Most viewers hear Middle East war and picture missiles, oil, and maps. What they usually do not picture is NATO tearing at the seams. But that may be one of the most important second-order consequences of the Iran war right now. Because a war does not just test weapons. It tests alliances. It tests burden sharing. It tests patience. And it tests whether allies still define the threat the same way. That is what makes alliance stories so powerful for viewers. They transform a crowded war story into something with a new question. Not just who hits whom, but which partnerships survive the pressure. Reuters reports that the Iran war has thrust NATO into a fresh crisis, with the United States angry over Europe's reluctance to support maritime security and broader military commitments tied to the conflict. That matters because NATO is built on trust, not just treaties. The moment major members stop trusting each other's willingness to show up, the alliance starts feeling weaker even before any formal split happens. The fact that Reuters is framing this as a fresh crisis inside NATO tells you the strain is no longer just background grumbling. It has become part of the story itself. If you want clear, high-stakes geopolitical analysis without the usual fluff, like this video, share it with someone who follows global affairs and subscribe. In other words, the battlefield is not only in the Gulf, it is also in the conference rooms where allies decide how much political risk, military support, and strategic ambiguity they are willing to absorb. The old NATO story was simple. Whatever arguments happened in public, the alliance would close ranks when it mattered most. The newest version is a lot messier. Washington wants support. Some European governments want distance. Some fear escalation. Some do not want to be pulled deeper into a war they did not choose. Some see the conflict as strategically important but politically toxic. And every hesitation looks different depending on which capital you are sitting in. Viewers understand betrayal and resentment instinctively. That is why alliance fracture content can perform so well when it is handled clearly. It is not just about policy. It is about whether the West still acts like a team when costs rise. This is what makes alliance strain such strong content. It is political drama, military strategy, and real-world consequence all in one package. If the United States begins openly questioning Europe's reliability, that changes the emotional temperature inside NATO. If Europe begins openly questioning Washington's judgment, that changes it even more. And once those two doubts start feeding each other, every meeting becomes less about unity and more about damage control. And once trust erodes, it is hard to restore. Allies remember who hesitated. They remember who pressured them publicly. They remember who seemed reckless and who seemed absent. Those memories shape future cooperation long after the immediate war ends. The symbolism matters too. NATO has always sold itself as the West's unshakable backbone. If viewers start seeing it behave like a family argument under pressure, that changes how they interpret every future crisis. The wider consequence is bigger than Iran. If allies fight over this conflict, they bring that distrust into every other theater too. Ukraine, the Baltic region, the Arctic, Mediterranean security. Even the long-term question of how Europe sees American leadership becomes harder. That is why this story is about more than a temporary argument. It may be a preview of a new alliance era where the United States still has unmatched power, but less automatic deference. And Europe still depends on Washington, but trusts it less than before. Higher defense spending can sound abstract until it becomes higher borrowing, less fiscal room, and harder trade-offs at home. When alliance cohesion weakens, governments usually spend more just to recreate the reassurance that used to come automatically. Markets and adversaries both watch these moments closely. One group asks whether the West can still coordinate. The other asks whether division creates opportunity. 5:15 to 6:30. There is also a personal impact angle here. When alliances become less predictable, markets do not love it. Defense spending rises. Energy security costs rise. Investors start pricing in a riskier strategic environment. Insurance and shipping can become more volatile. Governments divert more public money into resilience and military readiness. In other words, alliance friction is not just diplomatic theater. It can become an expensive way of life. That is why the Iran war matters beyond the region. It is forcing a public sorting process inside NATO. Which members are willing to risk escalation? Which members prioritize energy stability? Which members fear domestic backlash more than strategic drift? Those answers matter well beyond this one conflict. This is also where domestic politics enters. Leaders are not only managing allies, they are managing voters, parliaments, media pressure, and the fear of being blamed for either escalation or weakness. What makes the Iran war especially dangerous in this context is that it forces every NATO member to reveal its hierarchy of priorities. Is the main threat Russia? Is it instability around energy routes? Is it domestic political blowback? Is it avoiding escalation with Iran? Is it preserving U.S. goodwill? Is it protecting public opinion at home? The alliance is strongest when members answer those questions similarly. It gets shaky when everyone answers them differently. Also, watch whether European leaders start talking more openly about autonomy, independent capability, or hedging against American unpredictability. Those phrases often show up when trust is thinning, even if nobody wants to admit that openly. That matters, because strong alliances deter partly through perception. Once the perception starts to fray, rivals may begin testing boundaries more aggressively, assuming the response will be slower or less unified. Watch the next round of summit language, joint statements, and naval commitments. Watch not just what leaders say, but what they refuse to say. Watch who volunteers support and who speaks only in vague diplomatic phrases. Watch whether Washington escalates its pressure publicly. Because once alliance disputes become public performance, the damage compounds faster. The alliance may survive this intact on paper and still come out weaker in practice. That is the danger. Formal collapse is dramatic, but gradual hollowing out can be even more damaging because it leaves the appearance of strength without the same level of confidence underneath it. For your channel, this is a sharp algorithm angle because it lets you package the story as both political conflict and strategic consequence. It is bigger than another battlefield recap and more emotionally charged than a dry policy explainer. It also gives you a stronger call to comment. People will argue over whether Europe is cautious or weak, whether Washington is decisive or reckless, and whether alliance strain is temporary or structural. Controversy like that can drive engagement if the framing stays clear. So the real story may not be only whether the Iran war expands. It may also be whether it leaves NATO weaker, more suspicious, and more fragmented after the smoke clears. That is a fresh angle, because it takes a crowded war story and turns it into something audiences have not already heard 100 times. The alliance itself is part of the battlefield now. Comment below. What is more dangerous for the West, the Iran war itself, or the cracks it is opening inside NATO?